Imagine for a second, um, being so intensely, just profoundly starving that you find yourself completely immobilized.
Like physically unable to move.
Exactly. You're in a dark alley behind a butcher shop, entirely frozen in place, and you are staring at a single, solitary drop of fat.
Just one drop.
Right, just sliding down a discarded translucent sausage casing right there in the gutter. And you watch this one drop for, like, 20 uninterrupted minutes.
Which sounds insane.
It does, but in that tiny sliding bead of grease, something in your brain shifts, and you suddenly understand the entire metabolic chain of the universe.
Wow.
Yeah, the grass, the cow, the butcher, the city, the sea, all of it just compressed into one profound, annihilating moment of total clarity.
It is such an incredibly arresting, visceral image to start with. And I mean, it perfectly captures the terrifying threshold that we are looking at today.
Yeah, it really sets the tone.
It does. It's that razor-thin boundary between complete physical collapse and profound realization.
And that is exactly the threshold we're exploring in today's deep dive. So we are unpacking this truly fascinating literary triptych called The Hunger Below Zero.
Which is such a wild project.
It really is. What makes this source material so entirely unique is the actual method of its creation. Because it wasn't written by a single author laboring alone in a room somewhere.
Right. It was an AI collaboration.
Yeah, it was collaboratively generated by 3 different AI models, Claude, Gemini, and Grok, all working alongside human direction.
Which is just wild to think about.
Totally. And they were tasked with creating this incredibly dense, layered exploration of what happens to the human mind when the body is completely, totally deprived.
The core concept driving this entire project is a phrase the text introduces, like very early on. It calls it deprivation as epistemology.
Okay, that sounds heavy.
It is a bit, yeah. But for anyone who hasn't taken a philosophy class recently, epistemology is simply the study of how we know what we know. It's the theory of knowledge.
Right, how we arrive at the truth.
Exactly. So the premise here is looking at starvation not merely as a physical decline, not just as this tragic shutting down of biological systems.
So it is something else.
Right, it acts as a lens. The book actually asks us to consider starvation as a way of seeing.
So if you strip away all the comfort, all the calories, all the basic padding of ordinary life, do you actually see the underlying truth of the cosmos?
Yes. Or, and this is the big question, is your starving brain just generating a really convincing, desperate hallucination to comfort you while you die?
Which is such a terrifying thought. And the book traces this specific question through the lives of 3 different men in 3 different locations.
Right. We've got the Klondike, Paris, and Kristiania.
Yeah, Kristiania, which is modern-day Oslo. All 3 of these guys are starving to death.
Oh.
We get to watch how their minds warp and expand. So let's start out in the brutal, unforgiving winter of the Klondike.
Yeah, let's go there.
We're introduced to a man named Cal McReady.
McReady is just a fascinating starting point because he came north chasing the gold rush, carrying this immense entitlement.
Oh yeah, he really thought he was owed something.
Totally. He believed the world owed him a fortune. But by January, he is entirely trapped by the winter in this tiny 8 by 10 foot cabin.
And the atmosphere in this cabin is just heavy.
Oh, absolutely. It isn't just a shelter. It was actually built by a Swede who starved to death in it the previous winter.
Wait, a dead Swede? So he's literally living inside a frozen coffin, surrounded by the previous owner's leftover tools.
Yeah, and the lingering ghost of the exact fate he is currently facing.
That is so grim. And he's got a rapidly shrinking food supply. Specifically, he has 4 tins of substandard beef that he found hidden in the false bottom of a flour barrel.
And he's down to his last 2 sled dogs, right?
Right. One is named Standoff, and then there's a female dog he absolutely refuses to name.
That detail is so telling.
It really is. The text notes that, quote, naming made the eventual math unbearable. He just refers to her as the smaller one.
And that concept of math is crucial to understanding what McReady is going through. He comes to realize that the deep cold isn't just an environment you endure.
It's doing something to him.
Yeah, it is an active, almost surgical force. It performs this relentless arithmetic of removal on a person.
Taking things away piece by piece.
Exactly. First, obviously, it takes away your physical fat, but then it starts taking away behavior.
Like what?
Well, for example, he stops saying good morning to the dogs, or even talking to himself, because the literal physical act of forming syllables causes body heat.
Wow, just speaking is too expensive.
Right. Heat has become his only remaining currency, and he is entirely bankrupt. But then the cold starts going after his internal landscape. It starts deleting his memories.
Okay, let's unpack this because it isn't just that he's getting generally forgetful or suffering from, like, brain fog, right?
Yo, it's not like that at all?
It's methodical
Yeah.
and highly specific. Like, he realizes one morning that he cannot picture his former lover's eyes.
Which is terrifying.
And then he desperately tries to remember this specific burn scar she had on her left hand, and he just can't locate it in his mind. The cold has literally edited it out.
It's a targeted delusion.
Exactly. Think about your smartphone for a second. Like, when you put it on extreme battery saver mode, when the battery hits 1%, the phone aggressively shuts down all the background apps.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, it stops checking for emails, it dims the screen, turns off the fluid animations, all just to keep the core processor running for a few more minutes.
Right, survival mode.
That is exactly what McGreedy's body is doing to his consciousness. It is shutting down the luxury apps of grief, memory, and small talk, leaving only pure, unfiltered attention.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanism at play. And the text actually gives McGreedy his own metaphor for this exact state.
The telescope thing.
Yeah. He remembers reading an article years prior about the manufacturing of telescope lenses. To make a lens capable of gathering more light, to make it see further into the darkness, you actually have to grind the glass down.
You got to take material away.
Exactly. You physically remove material from the center to create the curve. He calls this his ground glass state.
Ground glass. I love that.
His body and his ego are being violently ground away, but the result is that he becomes incredibly, terribly capable of noticing the smallest details of the frozen world around him.
But how does a person even document a state of mind like that? I mean, if speaking out loud costs too much heat, how is he communicating this ground glass experience to us?
We see it entirely through the structure of the physical journal he keeps. The text mirrors his physical reduction.
The writing itself changes.
Yeah. When he first gets trapped in the cabin in November, his journal entries are sprawling. They are full, descriptive paragraphs.
Complaining, reflecting, all that.
Right. He's writing about checking his traps, documenting his frustrations, daydreaming about the woman back home. But by December, as the cold does its math, the entries shrink down to a single utilitarian sentence per day.
And then it gets even worse.
Much worse. By January, the entries are just individual words spaced out over several days.
I remember reading about a specific moment in January. A frozen branch breaks outside his cabin in the dead of night, and he opens his journal and writes just one word: snap. Nothing else. Because any other words describing how loud it was or how it startled him would just be unnecessary decoration. And decoration requires calories he just doesn't have.
It is a brilliant study in thermodynamic starvation. The wilderness is a void that actively subtracts from him.
Yeah.
But the brilliance of this book is how it juxtaposes different environments. We transition from the absolute isolation and sheer subtraction of the Klondike to a completely different manifestation of starvation.
Right. Because starvation doesn't always happen in an empty forest.
Exactly. Sometimes it happens in the middle of overwhelming, suffocating abundance.
Which brings us to Paris and Lucien Grave. He's a failed novelist living in the city. And if McGreedy is dealing with subtraction, Grade is dealing with the crushing, humiliating weight of the city around him.
He is entirely destitute.
Completely. He pawned his coat back in September. He pawned his boots in October, replacing them with a second-hand pair that are a full size too large.
Which means he has to slide his feet.
Right. He has to shuffle everywhere just to conserve the energy of lifting them. He's even pawned the pen he used to write his novels. He is wandering the streets of a bustling metropolis, starving by tiny invisible increments while life just carries on around him.
And Grave's ground glass realization takes on a purely anatomical flavor. He spends his days wandering past the massive Las Halles market.
Right. Surrounded by food.
Yes. This is a place overflowing with mountains of cabbages, bleeding carcasses of beef, endless commerce. And surrounded by all this, Grave realizes that Paris is not a society of citizens operating under a social contract.
It's something else.
It is a giant biological digesting organism. He calls it the iron belly.
The iron belly.
And he becomes obsessively fixated on this one specific spot in the gutter on the Rue Rambuteau. He names it the confluence.
Oh man, the confluence. This part was so vivid.
It's the exact spot where the bloody runoff from the meat stalls meets the muddy runoff from the vegetable stalls, creating this highly specific bruised tone color in the water. He stands there and cannot stop staring at it.
Okay, wait, I gotta push back here for a second. Is Grave actually having a profound sociological breakthrough here about the nature of urban life? Or is this just, the bitter resentment of a broke, hungry guy watching rich people eat while he wastes away?
That's a very fair question.
Because it feels like it could easily just be spite masquerading as philosophy.
Well, what's fascinating here is that Grave himself actually questions his own motives in the text. He anticipates that exact critique.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, but he realizes that what he's experiencing isn't resentment at all, because resentment requires an ego to feel slighted.
And his ego is gone.
Exactly. What he feels is a terrifying clinical lack of resentment. He watches a group of wealthy, well-dressed people leave a vibrant restaurant laughing and full, and he doesn't feel angry.
Really? Just nothing.
He studies them like a detached naturalist observing a different species.
Mm.
He makes this profound observation that wealth isn't just a collection of money or assets. Wealth is a, quote, quality of attention available to the hands.
Meaning what, exactly? That they don't have to pay attention to the ugly things.
Precisely. They possess the ultimate luxury, the privilege of blindness. The wealthy can walk right past that bruised-toned gutter without ever seeing it.
Because they don't have to.
Right. Their comfort allows them to be entirely blind to the messy, brutal machinery that keeps the city running. Graves' extreme hunger, however, has burned away that protective blindness.
He sees all of it.
He is forced to see every gear, every drop of blood, every transactional flow of energy. He writes in his notes that he feels like a peripheral cell in a giant body that the host organism has decided is no longer essential.
Wow.
The city is simply redirecting blood and resources away from him to feed the vital organs the wealthy.
Think about your own daily commute for a second. Think about how often you walk past the gutter, the trash bags piled on the curb, the exhausted workers, the sheer mechanics of your own city without truly registering any of it.
We all do it.
Yeah, you navigate your day enveloped in a protective bubble of routine. You have the privilege of not seeing the iron belly because you aren't currently being digested by it. Grave loses that bubble entirely.
And he extends this biological metaphor into the highest institutions of the city, too. To make a few pennies to survive, Graves sits outside the Palais de Justice, writing legal petitions for other poor, desperate people who can't read or write.
Right, he's like a scribe.
Sitting on those steps, he realizes that the law isn't some noble system dispensing justice. He calls the legal system a secondary gut. Its function isn't fairness. Its function is peristalsis.
Peristalsis, like the involuntary muscle contractions in your digestive tract that push food downward.
Exactly. He observes that the legal system simply digests the grievances of the poor, churning their anger and their claims over months and years.
Just wearing them down.
It grinds their outrage down until it is small enough and exhausted enough to pass through the system without rupturing the social order of the city.
That is just wow.
It is an entirely mechanical, biological function of the organism protecting itself.
It is such a chillingly detached perspective. Graves' hunger takes his vision and turns it completely outward. He becomes a cold, clinical lens focused on the digestion of society.
But the book doesn't stop there.
Right. It doesn't just stop with environmental subtraction or urban detachment. What happens when extreme deprivation doesn't turn your gaze outward, but violently inward, warping the very structure of your own identity?
That transition brings us to the unnamed, delirious wanderer in Kristiania.
A third guy.
Yes. This man's situation is distinct from the other two. He isn't trapped by hundreds of miles of snow like McReady, and he isn't entirely a victim of economic machinery like Grave.
It's his own doing, really.
His starvation is self-imposed in a way, driven purely by his own stubborn, immense pathological pride. He literally refuses charity when it is offered.
Which is just maddening to read.
It is. We find him wandering the freezing edges of the city, chewing on raw birch bark, and his starved brain is misfiring so wildly that it convinces him he can actually hallucinate the taste of ancient felled forests in the bitterness of the wood.
The psychological fracturing of this character is just wild. There is this astonishing, lengthy sequence where he sits on a bench near the harbor and fixates on the ankle of a passing woman.
Oh, that scene is incredible.
Just her ankle. And for 6 straight hours, he sits there and invents an entire complex biographical history for her based solely on the way she steps.
The level of detail he creates is absurd.
He decides she's from a specific rural province, Telemark, and that she turned that ankle on the ice 3 winters ago while carrying firewood. He constructs this massive, detailed narrative architecture around a total stranger's bone structure.
And then what happens?
As evening falls, he completely forgets it. The entire obsession vanishes from his mind as if it never existed.
His mind is desperately trying to assert control by creating meaning out of absolutely nothing. He eventually falls into a psychological state that he defines as the watched and unwatched condition.
The watched and unwatched condition.
He realizes he is existing in a state of total paradox. On one hand, he genuinely believes he is the target of a vast citywide conspiracy.
What paranoia.
Exactly. He feels that every passerby, every police officer, every shop window is secretly monitoring his specific downfall. The universe is intensely focused on him.
But simultaneously, at the exact same moment, he feels completely invisible. He is utterly convinced he is the least regarded man on Earth, a ghost, and that he could vanish into the harbor without a single person noticing or caring.
And what makes this so striking is that neither of these extreme beliefs cancels the other out.
Right.
His mind has completely lost the ability to filter out contradictory realities. He holds both the absolute terror of constant surveillance and the crushing despair of total invisibility as absolute truth, simultaneously.
Have you ever walked into a crowded room and felt this sudden, irrational spike of anxiety that everyone is staring at you, judging your clothes or your posture?
Oh, definitely.
But then 10 minutes later, in that same room, you feel entirely alone, like you couldn't get someone's attention if you screamed. The wanderer is feeling the absolute pathological extreme of both of those highly relatable human insecurities at the exact same time.
The tension of holding those two realities is just tearing him apart.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. You would logically think that all this physical starvation and mental fracturing would eventually make his immense pride weaken.
You'd think he'd break.
You'd think he would finally break down and beg for help, but he doesn't. At one point, he asks a local shopkeeper for a simple roll of bread on credit. The shopkeeper recognizes he is destitute and politely refuses.
And the wanderer's reaction is shocking.
The wanderer doesn't beg. He simply strikes the man. He punches the shopkeeper right to the floor. And in that split second of violence, he feels this pure, magnificent combustion inside his chest.
It's explosive.
Think of a dying star. When a massive star runs out of fuel, it doesn't just quietly fade away. The core collapses in on itself, becoming a white dwarf, a tiny, incredibly dense, unimaginably hot point of matter.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
That is what happened to the wanderer's pride. It didn't diminish, it compressed. It became this tiny, hard, combustible piece of coal that didn't even need a fire to keep burning. It just needed the tiniest provocation to explode.
That sudden explosion of violence sends him fleeing out into the cold, running back to the harbor, sitting on a bench with his hands trembling. And this brings us to the moment where the grand architecture of the book finally reveals itself.
The big convergence.
Yes. We have been tracing these three distinct, isolated paths of deprivation. The thermodynamic subtraction of MacReady out in the void, the anatomical clarity of Grave and the belly of the metropolis, and the subjective, prideful collapse of the wanderer.
3 different worlds.
But now, we arrive at the exact point where all three of their timelines violently crash into a single philosophical point.
The book brings us to a climax in a section simply titled Zero. Across 3 completely different latitudes, separated by thousands of miles of earth and ocean, at the exact same tick of the clock, 3 incredibly specific events occur.
First, in the frozen silence of the Klondike, Cal MacReady strikes his very last match against the iron of his stove, watching the entire history of human fire, of warmth, of civilization, compressed into that one shrinking orange point of light.
Okay.
Second, in the gutters of Paris, Lucien Grave is lying, immobilized in that dark alley, watching that single drop of fat slide down the discarded sausage casing, seeing the entire endless, brutal cycle of planetary consumption and excretion.
And the third.
And third, sitting on the docks in Kristiania, the wanderer watches a dockworker's discarded cigarette smoke unravel into the freezing evening air, suddenly able to visualize every separate carbon particle dispersing to eventually become future bread, future birds, future stars.
Man, it gives me chills. In that exact synchronized instant, the text tells us they stop being men. They become what the book calls the aperture.
Yes, the aperture. Think back to the ground glass. In this moment, they are ground down past all their ordinary human defenses, past all their biological padding, past their egos.
They become clear.
They essentially become holes or clear lenses through which the starving cosmos is finally able to look back at itself with unbearable, unfiltered clarity.
It is presented as this moment of absolute, transcendent, almost divine connection to the universe. But The book doesn't let us off the hook that easily.
No, it doesn't.
The fictional editor of this manuscript brings up a massive caveat in a footnote at the very end of the text.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the editor poses what he calls the counterfeit question. He steps out of the narrative and asks the reader directly what is actually happening in the zero moment.
Right. Are they really seeing the truth?
Are these three men truly achieving a literal mystical enlightenment? Have they actually ground the glass down enough to see the hidden gears of the universe? Or is this just the highly predictable, universal biological misfiring of a primate brain being starved of glucose?
Just an illusion.
Right. Is this profound cosmic connection just a counterfeit symptom of dying?
And what is so brilliant about the design of The Hunger Below Zero is that we are never given the answer. The editor outright refuses to choose a side.
He leaves it hanging.
He says that both possibilities, the divine revelation and the biological hallucination, remain equally true within the text. He asks you, the reader, to just sit there and hold the deep discomfort of both of those realities at once. It's up to you to carry that tension.
It effectively forces the reader to occupy the exact same paradoxical space that the wanderer did on his bench. You have to hold two conflicting truths without resolving them.
But the story doesn't just cut to black on that abstract note. Right?
No, it gives us a brief, haunting glimpse of the aftermath in a closing section called The Thaw.
Right. We do find out the ultimate fate of the three men. Up in the Klondike, McGreedy is found frozen solid months later by a survey team. His journal is recovered from the floor of the cabin.
And his final entry.
His final entry, the very last thing he wrote as he dissolved into the white silence and the match went out, is just 4 haunting words. Crystal. Void. Standoff. Good.
A statement of total, peaceful resolution.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in Paris, Grave actually survives. He is found unconscious in the alley and taken to a hospital ward. But the physical process of refeeding his body doesn't undo what his mind saw in the gutter.
He can't unsee the iron belly.
Exactly. He abandons his grand, sweeping literary ambitions of trying to save the world through beautiful description. Instead, he decides to write a smaller, truer honesty. He accepts his tiny place in the city's digestive machinery without needing to rage against it anymore.
And the wanderer in Kristiania, he remains a ghost. The last fragment we have of his narrative simply describes him walking toward a massive ship at the docks, looking for physical labor, entirely uncertain of his future.
Just moving forward.
Right, carrying absolutely nothing forward with the plain physical fact of his own continued motion.
This raises an important question, one that resonates far beyond the pages of this AI-collaborated text. While the origins of The Hunger Below Zero are rooted in a technological experiment between language models, the core human question it drills into is undeniably profound.
Really is.
How much of our everyday reality is just fat? How much of what we passionately believe is important is actually just comfortable padding that blocks our true vision of the world?
You navigate your day padded by comfort, by your routines, by the assurance of a full stomach, and by the sheer privilege of being able to look away from the gutter. But if all that padding were slowly, methodically stripped away, piece by piece, what is the ground glass truth about your world that you are currently just too comfortable to see?